The first thing that went wrong was a Tuesday morning in February when the ovens at line 3 fired up 12 minutes late and nobody on the floor knew why. I knew why. I always knew why. That's the thing about spending 19 years inside the same facility. You stop reading the machines and start hearing them. The hum from the east compressor was half a tone lower than it should have been. The belt tension on conveyor 4 had been creeping for 3 weeks. I'd flagged it twice in writing. The maintenance log showed both entries. Management acknowledged neither. My name is Peter, and for 19 years, I was the production floor supervisor at Briarfield Food Manufacturing in Cambridge, Ontario. We made frozen meals, pot pies, pasta trays, family casseroles, the kind of stuff you find in the freezer section at Loblaws or No Frills with someone else's brand name on the box. At our peak, we were running 4 lines, 5 days a week, producing somewhere around 42,000 units per shift. We had 140 workers on the floor, a rotating crew of quality techs, a maintenance team that I'd basically built from scratch after the old one got gutted in 2017, and a safety record that the plant manager used to brag about at regional meetings. None of that mattered on the day my son-in-law walked into my office with a business card that wasn't his. Let me back up. My daughter had been with him for about 4 years before they got married. He's a smart guy. Genuinely, I'll give him that. Did his MBA at Schulich, landed a decent role at a consulting firm in Toronto, used to talk at dinner about operational efficiency the way some people talk about the weather. I'd nod and pass the potatoes. I figured it was harmless. I figured wrong. The ownership at Briarfield had changed hands twice in the decade before I left. First, a local family sold to a mid-sized private equity group out of Mississauga, and then that group sold to a larger firm with offices in Calgary and no visible interest in what we actually made. What they were interested in was margin. And somewhere along the way, my son-in-law had made himself very useful to the people who cared about margin. He came to my office on a Wednesday in late October. I remember because the quarterly production numbers were due that Friday, and I had 3 binders open on my desk. He knocked, which he never does at home, and he was wearing a jacket I hadn't seen before. He said he had something to share with me. He said it in the way people say things when they've already decided and they're just covering the formality of telling you. He told me that starting in January, Briarfield was going to transition its production floor operations to a platform called OptiCore. I said I hadn't heard of it. He said that was fine, that the team would be onboarding everyone over the next few weeks. I asked who built it. He said it was a company out of Waterloo. I asked how big their largest deployment was. He looked at his phone. He said he'd have to get back to me on that. I asked him directly, "What does this mean for my role?" He said my position was being restructured, that the new system would be handling scheduling, line coordination, quality flag escalation, maintenance dispatch, and shift reporting. He said the company was confident that OptiCore's machine learning capabilities would deliver comparable outcomes with a leaner headcount. He said they appreciated everything I'd contributed. 19 years. I drove home that night on the 401 and I didn't turn the radio on. I just listened to the road. My wife was in the kitchen when I got in. She knew something was wrong before I said a word. She's always been able to do that, read a room by reading me. I sat down at the kitchen table and I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. When I was done, she said, quietly, that she was going to have a conversation with her daughter. I told her not to. It wouldn't change anything, and I didn't want it to become something between them. That was probably the hardest call I made in all of it. Harder than cleaning out my locker, harder than signing the separation papers. Keeping my wife from fighting a battle I'd already decided wasn't hers to fight. My last day was a Thursday in December. I shook hands with the people who came to say goodbye, which was most of the floor. Genuinely, most of them showed up, which I'll never forget. A few of them hugged me. My assistant supervisor, who'd been with me for 11 years, walked me to my truck and didn't say much. There wasn't much to say. He knew what I knew. The new system hadn't been tested under real conditions. Not Cambridge in January, real conditions. Not frozen product line failure at 3 a.m, real conditions. OptiCore went live on January 6th. By January 10th, line 2 had been running 4 degrees below optimal temperature for 18 hours. The system had flagged it as a minor calibration issue and auto-resolved it, which is what machine learning does when nobody teaches it the difference between a minor calibration issue and a product integrity failure. About 9,000 units of chicken pot pies went out on that truck. They went to a distribution center in Hamilton. The temperature variance wasn't caught until a quality check at the other end, and by then, the cold chain documentation was already a mess. The product had to be pulled. The customer, one of Briarfield's 2 largest retail accounts, opened an investigation. The account manager called the plant. The plant manager called my son-in-law's contact at OptiCore. The contact had a very confident explanation involving sensor calibration and a patch that was already in development. The plant manager sent the explanation up the chain. The people up the chain accepted it. By January 17th, line 4 had gone down completely. The OptiCore scheduling algorithm had been cycling that line's conveyor motor in a pattern that any experienced tech would recognize as a precursor to bearing failure. My old maintenance notes actually described this exact failure mode. I'd written them up in 2021 after we'd had a similar issue with a different motor supplier. Nobody at OptiCore had read my maintenance notes. I'm not sure they knew my maintenance notes existed. The motor seized on a Friday night. Repairs took 11 days. During those 11 days, the plant was running at 75% capacity. That sounds manageable until you know that Briarfield had signed a volume commitment with its second largest retail customer in November, and that commitment assumed full 4-line output. The shortfall triggered a penalty clause. I found out about most of this from my assistant supervisor. He was texting me every couple of days, not asking for help, just venting, I think. He needed someone who understood the machinery to talk to, and the people he was working with now didn't speak the same language. He'd tell me what was failing, and I'd nod at my phone in my kitchen and feel something that wasn't quite satisfaction and wasn't quite grief, just the weight of having been right about something you didn't want to be right about. The shift workers started missing hours in February. Not fired, just scheduled down because the output numbers weren't there to justify full shifts. These were people with mortgages in Cambridge and Kitchener, people whose whole financial picture was built around a certain number of hours per week. Some of them had been on that floor longer than my son-in-law had been out of undergrad. They weren't getting answers from management. The plant manager was in damage control mode. The OptiCore team was still talking about patches and learning curves. My wife mentioned once that our daughter seemed stressed. I said that was between her and her husband. My wife looked at me for a long moment and then went back to whatever she was doing. We didn't discuss it further. The call came on a Thursday morning in early March. It was the plant manager, not my son-in-law, the plant manager himself, which told me something about how far things had deteriorated. He said he'd like to talk. I said I was available. He asked if I could come to the plant. I said I'd rather meet somewhere neutral. We met at a Tim Hortons off Hespeler Road. He looked like he hadn't slept well in 6 weeks, which he probably hadn't. He told me what I already mostly knew. 2 product recalls, 1 retailer threatening to terminate the supply agreement, the maintenance backlog at a level that was creating safety concerns, shift workers logging formal complaints about irregular scheduling, and an OptiCore system that could not, under any circumstances, figure out why line 1's output weights were running 2 grams light per unit. I knew why. The portioning head on the left side needed a shim adjustment. 30-minute fix. I'd done it 4 times in 12 years. He asked if I would be willing to come back. I asked in what capacity. He said they wanted to restore my previous role. He said the restructuring had been, in his assessment, premature. I noted that his assessment would have been useful in October. He acknowledged that. I told him I need some time to think. I took 3 days. My wife didn't push me one way or another, which is one of the things I love about her. She made coffee and let me sit with it. I made a list, not because I needed one, but because writing things down settles me. On the 4th day, I called the plant manager back. I told him I'd return under 4 conditions. First, my compensation would be increased by 22% to reflect the scope of institutional knowledge I was being asked to bring back. Second, OptiCore would remain in place, but in an advisory capacity only. It could run its algorithms and generate its reports, but no automated action would be taken on maintenance, scheduling, or quality escalation without sign-off from me or my designated team. Third, the shift workers who'd had their hours cut during the disruption would receive full back pay for the variance. Fourth, my role would report directly to the regional VP of operations, not to the plant manager, and certainly not through any channel connected to my son-in-law. The plant manager went quiet for a moment. Then he said he'd take it to the ownership group. They accepted all 4 conditions by the following Monday. I drove to the plant the next morning. My assistant supervisor met me at the gate. He didn't make a big deal of it, just nodded and said, "Line 1's portioning head is still off." I said I knew. He said the OptiCore ticket on it was 11 days old. I said I'd look at it first thing. I was done with the shim adjustment by 8:40 a.m. The quality flag cleared itself within the hour. The system logged the resolution as a successful autonomous correction. I let that one go. The shift workers got their back pay processed by the end of the month. With a small top-up that I'd pushed for in a separate conversation with the regional VP, it wasn't everything they'd lost. Time away from a job does things to a family that a check can't fully fix. But it was something, and it was done quickly, which matters. The retail account that had opened an investigation ended up staying. It took 2 meetings and a lot of documentation, but they stayed. The second account renegotiated terms rather than walking. Briarfield came out of the quarter bruised but standing. My son-in-law's contract with the ownership group was quietly wound down in April. I didn't hear this from him. I heard it from my assistant supervisor, who heard it from someone in finance. My daughter called me that evening, which was the first time she'd called in a while. She didn't mention work. We talked about spring and whether her mother and I wanted to come down to see the new place they'd been renovating. I said we'd love to. My wife made reservations for a weekend in June. I don't tell this story because I'm bitter. I've had 19 years on a production floor. I've been around long enough to know that companies make bad calls and then sometimes make better ones. What I carry from it isn't the satisfaction of being proven right, though I'd be lying if I said that part wasn't there. What I carry from it is what I saw in my assistant supervisor's face the morning I came back, and what I heard when the workers on line 3 realized their back pay had cleared. There's a sound a floor makes when things are running correctly. It's a combination of motor hum and conveyor rhythm and the low-grade clatter of product moving at the right speed. You learn to hear it after enough years. When it's off, you feel it in your chest before you can name it. When it comes back, it's the same. There's no algorithm that teaches you that. You just have to be there long enough and care enough and show up enough times in the cold at 3 in the morning when something you built is the only thing standing between your company and a very expensive mistake. Here's to the people who show up, and here's to the company smart enough, eventually, to figure out who they are. I've been thinking about what actually happened at Briarfield. Not the product recalls, or the penalty clauses, or the 11 days line 4 sat idle. Those are just numbers. What I keep coming back to is the morning I drove back through that gate and Dale met me without a word, just a nod and a problem to solve. That's the whole story right there. No ceremony. Just work that needed doing and someone who knew how to do it. I don't think the people who made those decisions were evil. I think they were careless with something they didn't fully understand. There's a particular kind of confidence that comes with a credential and no scar tissue, the kind that mistakes a spreadsheet for a floor, a pitch deck for a decade of hard-won pattern recognition. My son-in-law isn't a bad person, but he made a recommendation about a system he hadn't stress-tested in an environment he'd never worked in, and 140 people felt that in their paychecks before he felt it anywhere at all. That gap between the person who decides and the person who absorbs the consequence, that's where a lot of damage lives. What kept me from being bitter, mostly, was that I knew what I was worth. Not in an arrogant way, just in the quiet, settled way you know things after 19 years of showing up. I knew what that floor sounded like when it was right. I knew the bearing on line 4 was failing 3 weeks before it ceased. I knew the portioning head shim would take 30 minutes, and I knew it without looking anything up. That knowledge is real. It accumulates slowly, and it doesn't transfer through software, and it doesn't show up on an onboarding deck. When the plant manager called me from that Tim Hortons on Hespler Road, I didn't feel vindicated so much as I felt clear. I knew what I was walking back into, and I knew what it was going to cost them to have me back. And I had the composure to name my price without flinching. I think about the shift workers who got their back pay. That mattered to me more than my own conditions, honestly. These were people doing honest, physical work in a cold building in a Canadian winter, and some consultant's miscalculation had eaten into their hours with no explanation and no apology. Getting that corrected wasn't revenge. It was just the right thing, and I was in a position to push for it, so I did. That's the only version of winning that actually sits well with me. If I had to put words to what carried me through it, I'd say it was 3 things, none of them complicated. Knowing what was right and doing it even when it cost me something. Trusting what I'd learned over the years and not letting someone else's confidence talk me out of it. And staying in the game long enough to be useful when it mattered. The first one kept my integrity intact when I could have made it personal with my daughter's marriage. The second one kept me ready when the call came. The third one meant the call came at all. The floor is running properly now. All 4 lines. The ovens on line 3 fire up on time. That's enough for me.